The kitchen clock struck 11:47 p.m., its ticking loud against the suffocating silence. I stood by the counter, my hands cold around a mug of untouched tea, when the front door slammed. David's footsteps echoed down the hallway, measured, deliberate, heavy with something darker than exhaustion. He entered still in his navy suit, the smell of expensive bourbon and a faint trace of unfamiliar perfume following him like a shadow. His eyes, once warm, were now glassy and sharp. Without a word, he dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Sign here," he said flatly, tapping the pages. "Here. And here." I didn't move. He pulled out a pen and shoved it across the polished surface. "You get nothing, Rachel. No house, no alimony, no second chances. You walk away with what you came with, nothing." His voice had the precision of a knife practiced and cruel. The sound of the pen rolling across the wood seemed louder than the words themselves. I looked at him, my husband of 12 years, and saw a stranger in his eyes. "Why now?" I asked softly, my voice steady, though my throat burned. "Because I'm done pretending," he replied, his tone laced with contempt. "You've held me back for years, teaching kids history while I build real wealth. You wouldn't understand ambition if it bit you." He smiled faintly, that smug, corporate smirk that used to charm clients and now curdled in our kitchen light. He expected me to cry, to plead, to make a scene, but I didn't. I simply reached for the pen. My hand didn't tremble, though I could feel my pulse pounding in my wrist. The moment the pen touched paper, David leaned closer, his cologne suffocating. "Good girl," he whispered, and the words crawled across my skin like frost. I signed where he pointed, page after page, each signature a quiet storm inside my chest. He watched, waiting for the collapse for me to break. Instead, I slid the pen back toward him and said, "It's done." For a fraction of a second, I saw confusion flicker in his eyes just before arrogance reclaimed his face. "You're making this easier than I thought," he said, snapping the folder shut. "I almost feel sorry for you." He turned toward the hallway, muttering something under his breath about Sophia being worth the risk. The name landed like a stone in my stomach. So, it was her, the ambitious assistant from his firm. I had suspected for months, but hearing it confirmed didn't sting the way he hoped. Instead, something colder settled inside me, a clarity that felt almost serene. "David," I called softly as he reached the door. He stopped but didn't turn. "You might want to double-check what you just had me sign," I said evenly. He gave a short laugh. "I know exactly what's in them, Rachel. I wrote them myself." "Did you?" I asked, my voice quiet but razor-sharp. "Or did Patrick write them for you again?" He froze mid-step. The silence stretched. Slowly, he turned, eyes narrowing. "How do you know about that?" I smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what I notice." His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The clock ticked louder. After a long pause, he muttered, "Don't do anything stupid," and left the door slamming behind him. The echo lingered. I stood there in the cold light, the scent of bourbon and betrayal thick in the air, my heart steady for the first time in months. He thought he had won, but what he didn't realize was that the game had just begun. 6 months earlier, the first crack in our marriage appeared like a hairline fracture no one else could see, but I could feel. It began with his late-night business trips to Houston, the ones that always ended with a half-hearted excuse and a new expense on his card, labeled consulting dinner. I never confronted him. Instead, I watched, memorizing every inconsistency, every lie delivered too smoothly. The night it all became undeniable was a Wednesday in April. David had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone buzzing on the coffee table. I told myself not to look, but curiosity was no longer. Curiosity, it was survival. The message glowed in the dark. "You'll be free soon. So will our accounts." A.M. The initials tightened my chest. I scrolled up. Photos, transfers, private jokes about me. "She still thinks you're loyal," one message read. "You'll have everything once she signs." My hands trembled, but I didn't cry. I simply put the phone down and turned off the light. That was the night I stopped being naive and started being careful. The next morning over coffee, I studied him. He smiled, asked if I'd washed his navy suit, kissed my cheek. My lips smiled back, but my mind was already building a case. I reached out to my closest friend, Linda Harper, the school's guidance counselor and part-time financial consultant. I didn't tell her everything just enough. She looked at me across the teacher's lounge table, eyes narrowing. If he's hiding assets, Rachel, don't confront him. Collect proof. Quietly. Those words became my mantra. That weekend, I opened a private storage drive, scanning every joint document I could access. Bank statements, tax returns, property titles. Buried beneath digital clutter, I found what Linda warned me about: a consulting company registered in Nevada under the name DM Holdings, with one silent partner, AM. It was the woman I suspected all along, Allison Moore, his assistant. The same woman who used to compliment my dress at company parties. Every transaction was a thread in his web of betrayal, and I began untangling it with surgical precision. For weeks, I acted normal. I packed his lunches, attended school board meetings, even laughed at his jokes. Behind closed doors, I met with Linda again, and at her insistence with an attorney she trusted, Thomas Avery, a seasoned divorce specialist known for dismantling financial fraud. Thomas was calm, analytical, the kind of man who spoke like a surgeon before an operation. If he's planning to cheat you out of everything he said, we'll make sure he signs his own confession instead. He handed me a small folder. Inside was a checklist titled Asset Recovery Strategy. It outlined exactly what to document: withdrawals, transfers, signatures. It'll take patience, he warned, but people like David always make the same mistake: they think you're too emotional to notice the math. That sentence stayed with me. Over the next few months, I became fluent in his deceptions. Every time he lied, I wrote the date and time. Every unexplained transaction I copied. Every conversation I recorded. My life became a classroom of deceit, and I was learning fast. By the time summer came, I wasn't broken anymore. I was ready. When David mentioned his golf buddy Patrick, a supposed lawyer who helps with paperwork, I felt a quiet spark of anticipation. Because I already knew Patrick wasn't licensed to practice law. Thomas had found that out weeks earlier, and in that moment, I realized something crucial. David wasn't just cheating on me, he was about to commit fraud, and that, unlike love, had consequences I could prove. The first time I met with Thomas Avery, it was in the back corner of a public library where no one from David's circle would ever appear. The attorney looked over the files I had collected: months of statements, screenshots, and recorded conversations, and nodded slowly, impressed. "You've done more groundwork than most investigators," he said, flipping through the pages. "He's transferring marital assets into a shell company, likely preparing to declare them separate property before divorce. That's premeditated fraud." His voice was calm, almost surgical. He drew a quick diagram on a legal pad, boxes and arrows, connecting David's personal account to DM Holdings, then to another offshore account. "If he tries to trick you into signing a divorce agreement, we'll make sure he signs something else instead." His words carried the steady confidence of someone who had turned traps back on their makers before. I sat across from him, feeling the weight of exhaustion, but also a strange spark of power. For the first time in months, I wasn't the victim in the story. I was the one writing its next chapter. Thomas explained the plan step by step. I would act completely compliant, never confront, never raise suspicion. If David prepared documents for me to sign, I'd sign, but not his papers. They would be duplicates, nearly identical, except for the small but devastating differences his unlicensed friend Patrick wouldn't notice. Each version would contain clauses transferring the marital assets back to me, as well as a sworn statement confirming his misuse of joint funds. "We'll disguise it as boilerplate legal language," Thomas said. "He won't read beyond the first few paragraphs." It was bold, risky, but meticulously sound. Linda, ever the strategist, joined us to add her expertise on financial record timing. "Make sure everything is notarized in advance," she suggested. "That way, even if he claims coercion, the timestamps prove he initiated the transaction." The plan evolved into a quiet machine of precision. I spent weeks rehearsing my role, measured voice, neutral expression, calm acceptance. I practiced signing papers in the mirror until I could do it without my hands shaking. Linda brought me a small, discreet camera the size of a button and showed me how to place it in the kitchen clock, the one David never noticed. "He's going to choose his moment when you look most defenseless," she warned. "Let him think that. The clock will see everything." Every word, every motion, every pen stroke would be recorded in high definition. In the evenings when David came home late, smelling of someone else's perfume, I smiled as if nothing had changed. He mistook my silence for surrender, my calm for defeat. What he didn't understand was that I had already moved past heartbreak into strategy. When he bragged about Patrick's legal expertise, I listened, feigning admiration. Patrick was a golf friend with a reputation for shady advice, a man already under investigation for practicing law without a license. Thomas had obtained that information through official channels, ready to use it if needed. Each night, I reviewed my notes like a lesson plan, every lie becoming another entry in my private syllabus of deceit. One afternoon, I found a draft document in the home printer titled Marital Settlement Proposal. It was sloppy, filled with typos and missing signatures. That was my signal. I texted Linda, Stage 1 confirmed. Draft located. Her reply came seconds later. Then it's time to prepare the real one. We met in her office that evening, the sunset cutting gold light across the stacks of files. She slid a crisp envelope toward me, sealed and labeled. "These are your papers," she said. "The moment he tries to force your hand, you give him this exact folder. Don't hesitate." I held the envelope, feeling its weight thin but heavy with consequence. For months, David had believed I was too meek to fight back. But as I tucked the folder into my bag, I realized something quietly thrilling. He wasn't the only one preparing for a signature. He just didn't know whose signature would matter most. When it finally happened, it wasn't cinematic. There was no thunder, no rain, no dramatic argument, just the sound of the front door opening at 11:30 p.m. and David's voice calling my name like a man summoning an employee. He walked into the kitchen carrying his leather briefcase. His tie loosened the smell of bourbon and arrogance, heavy in the air. Without a greeting, he dropped a thick folder onto the table. "We're ending this tonight," he said flatly. "Sign these papers and we can both move on." I looked at the folder, recognizing the cover Thomas had replicated down to the last staple. My pulse didn't spike. I had prepared for this exact moment. David began pacing, impatient. Patrick reviewed everything, he continued, and it's airtight. "You'll get what's fair, nothing." His smirk stretched wider as he opened the folder and slid the top page toward me. "Here, here, and here," he said, tapping each section like a commander giving orders. I studied him the way his fingers trembled slightly, how his wedding ring was already missing. His confidence wasn't strength. It was desperation disguised as control. I took the pen from the table and began signing each stroke, smooth, deliberate, silent. David stood behind me, his shadow cutting across the paper. "You're calmer than I expected," he muttered, his voice lowering. "I thought you'd cry, maybe beg. I guess you're just too tired to fight." I looked up at him briefly. "I learned fighting doesn't always mean yelling." The words confused him, but he brushed it off, tapping his phone, likely messaging her Allison. "She's different, Rachel," he said suddenly, almost as if confessing to justify his cruelty. "She has drive. She understands ambition." The name didn't hurt anymore. It only confirmed how far he had fallen from the man I married. "I hope she gives you everything you're looking for," I said quietly. "You deserve each other." He mistook my calm for surrender again, grinning as he gathered the signed pages. "Don't do anything stupid," he said, stuffing the papers into his briefcase. "Patrick will file everything tomorrow." He turned toward the door, stopping only when I said his name. "David." He looked back, annoyed. "You might want to double-check what you just had me sign." He laughed under his breath. "I know exactly what's in those papers. I wrote them myself." I tilted my head slightly. "Did you, or did Patrick write them again?" The air froze. His expression faltered, confusion tightening around his jaw. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice low. "Good night, David," I said simply, turning away. The seconds stretched thin, then the slam of the door broke the silence. I stood still, every nerve alive, the adrenaline shaking through my fingertips. Then I exhaled long and steady, letting the moment settle. I reached for the wall clock pressed to the hidden latch and removed the SD card from the camera. The tiny device had caught every word, every threat, every order. I placed it carefully into a small metal box labeled Stage 2. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Linda. He took the bait. I typed back. "Stage 2 complete. Then I poured myself a glass of water, the reflection of the kitchen light trembling on its surface. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel powerless. I felt ready. Upstairs, the house was silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioner. On the bed lay the remnants of our marriage, a forgotten photo frame, an empty drawer, a life that no longer belonged to either of us. As I turned off the light, the thought came to me sharp and calm. He had no idea what he'd just signed, and by the time he realized, it would already be too late. Morning came too early. The house was still heavy with the smell of his cologne when my phone began to vibrate across the nightstand. At first, I ignored it. The display lit up with his name, David. Then again. Then again. By the fourth call, I let it go to voicemail. When the fifth one came, I answered, my voice calm and level. "Rachel, what the hell did you do?" His tone was nothing like the night before. Gone was the arrogance. In its place was panic threaded with disbelief. "These papers, these aren't right. Patrick says this isn't what we drafted. You switched them." I let silence stretch until it hurt. Then I said evenly, "You told me to sign and I did." He sputtered something unintelligible, then hung up. 5 minutes later, a stream of text messages followed. "You can't do this. These aren't legal. You tricked me. Answer me. Rachel. Answer me." I didn't. I made coffee instead, the rich smell filling the kitchen while sunlight spilled through the blinds. The world looked the same, but I wasn't the same woman anymore. I stepped outside to the back porch, the air crisp and clear. Birds were chirping, the kind of ordinary sound that felt extraordinary after chaos. My phone kept buzzing. I turned it face down on the table. At 7:12 a.m., a new message appeared, short, furious, desperate. "You'll regret this." I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. My peace was louder than his threats. By 8:00, Linda pulled into the driveway, laptop bag slung over her shoulder and a quiet smile on her face. "He's losing it, isn't he?" she said, stepping into the kitchen. I gestured toward my phone, the screen full of missed calls. "He's unraveling faster than we thought." Linda poured herself a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. "Thomas already got an email from Patrick. Apparently David's friend is panicking too. He's realizing those documents he drafted might cost him his freedom." I raised an eyebrow. "Good," Linda chuckled. "You've changed, Rachel." "No," I said quietly. "I've just stopped apologizing for noticing the truth." She turned her laptop toward me, showing a recorded clip from the hidden camera. David's face frozen mid-threat, the timestamp glowing clear in the corner. The sound played softly. "You get nothing, Rachel. No alimony. No house." Watching it again didn't sting. It satisfied. "This," Linda said, "is the kind of evidence juries love." I nodded. He thought the house was his stage. He never realized it was my courtroom. We shared a look that said everything relief, justice, and something close to friendship forged in fire. As Linda packed up to leave, I glanced at the sunlight on the kitchen floor, thinking about how quiet victory felt. It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was steady calm, the kind of strength that didn't need an audience. My phone buzzed one last time before I turned it off. Another message from David. "I need to see you. We have to fix this." I smiled faintly. "We will," I whispered to the empty room. "Just not the way you expect." By 8:30, the doorbell rang so hard it rattled the frame. I already knew who it was. David stood outside, still in the same suit from the night before. Shirt-wrinkled hair, uncombed, his briefcase clutched like a lifeline. His eyes were bloodshot, his confidence stripped away. I opened the door, slowly leaning against it as if he were just another salesman. "You look like you haven't slept," I said evenly. "What did you do, Rachel?" he demanded, pushing past me into the kitchen. "You switched the papers. You think this is a game? Those weren't the documents Patrick gave me." His voice cracked with panic, echoing off the walls. I motioned to the table. "Sit down. You'll spill your coffee yelling like that." He ignored the chair, pacing, rubbing his temples. "You have no idea what you've done. Patrick says this is fraud." A voice spoke calmly from the far end of the kitchen. "Actually, it's not." David froze. Linda was seated at the table, laptop open, her posture composed. "Who are you?" he snapped. "Linda Harper," she said politely. "Senior paralegal at Avery Law Group." His face went white. Avery, as in Thomas Avery. That's right, she said, clicking a key on the laptop. We represent Mrs. Mendez. The title made him flinch. You can't just sit down. I interrupted, my voice calm, but sharp enough to cut through his noise. He hesitated, then obeyed, his breathing ragged. Linda turned the screen toward him. These are the documents you signed last night, Mr. Mendez. Fully time-stamped, notarized, and witnessed by video surveillance. She played the clip. The footage showed him towering over me, ordering me to sign his words crystal clear. You get nothing. No house. No alimony. Every syllable dripped venom. David's face paled as the sound filled the room. That's illegal surveillance, he barked. It's home security footage, Linda replied. Installed 3 months ago for safety. Perfectly legal. She clicked to the next file. Now, as you can see, the documents include a transfer of all joint assets to Mrs. Mendez's sole ownership pages 3, 7, and 12, and a signed affidavit acknowledging misuse of marital funds for an extramarital affair with one Allison Moore. David blinked rapidly, trying to keep up. That's impossible, Patrick said. Patrick is not a licensed attorney. I interrupted, my tone almost gentle. You really should check your sources before committing felony fraud. His mouth opened, then closed. You set me up, he whispered, his voice trembling between anger and disbelief. No, I said softly. You set yourself up. I just stopped pretending not to see it. Linda slid another file across the table. We also have screenshots of the messages between you and Patrick planning to present falsified documents. The thread is quite detailed. If you'd like, we can read them out loud. He swallowed hard. You wouldn't dare. We don't have to, Linda said coolly. Thomas already forwarded them to the district attorney's office for review. David slammed his palm against the table. You can't do this to me. I stood slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time since the night before. You did this to yourself, David. You wanted control. You wanted power. But you forgot one thing. What he snapped. That I've always paid attention. His shoulders sagged as if the words themselves weighed 100 pounds. He sank into the chair, his head in his hands. If this gets out, I'll lose my job, he muttered. Your job is the least of your concerns, Linda replied crisply. Attempted fraud, coercion, and falsifying documents are serious charges. He looked up at me, eyes wild. Please, Rachel, we can fix this. No, I said quietly. We can end this. I placed the real divorce agreement on the table. You can sign this now, fair terms, no charges, or you can refuse and we proceed with prosecution. He stared at the papers, hands trembling. You wouldn't. I nodded toward the laptop still recording. Everything you've said this morning is now on video. I think I would. The silence stretched long and cold. Linda closed her laptop. You have 24 hours to decide, Mr. Mendez. He rose unsteadily, gathering the scattered papers from the table, his dignity shredded. Before leaving, he turned to me one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. You've changed. No, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. I finally started paying attention to the fine print. He left without another word. When the door clicked shut, the air felt lighter. Linda exhaled slowly, a small smile forming. That went even better than planned. I sat down, my hands steady for the first time in months. It wasn't luck, I said. It was preparation. When the door closed behind him, the quiet felt almost unnatural, like the air itself had stopped moving. Linda shut her laptop and looked at me with the calm of someone who'd seen justice unfold 1,000 times before. He'll be back, she said simply. They always come back when the adrenaline wears off. She was right. Less than 2 hours later, the first email arrived. Then another. Then a text. We need to talk. Please. I didn't answer. Thomas called around noon. Everything's set, he said. If he refuses to sign the legitimate agreement within 24 hours, I'll file charges for attempted fraud, coercion, and unlawful presentation of falsified legal documents. His tone was steady, professional, but I could hear the satisfaction behind it. You've done remarkably well, Rachel. I've seen clients fall apart under less pressure. I smiled faintly. Maybe teaching teenagers prepared me for this. He laughed softly. Probably better training than law school. When I hung up, I opened the kitchen window and let the Texas breeze move through the house. The place smelled different now, cleaner, freer. I sat at the table staring at the pile of official papers that once symbolized control but now meant freedom. Each page bore his signature, his arrogance turned into evidence. Linda returned that evening with a fresh thermos of coffee and her usual unshakable composure. "He's panicking," she said, scrolling through her tablet. "Patrick tried to contact my firm today. He's terrified. He's also just been subpoenaed in an unrelated case, so his credibility is gone." "Perfect timing," I murmured. "What about David?" She smirked. "He's emailing Thomas every hour. Threats, apologies, bargaining. It's the entire psychological roller coaster of a man cornered by his own mistakes." We spent the next hour reviewing the paperwork one last time, ensuring every line was legally bulletproof. The hidden camera footage was copied onto 3 encrypted drives, one for Thomas, one for the DA's office, and one for me. There would be no loopholes, no denial. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete control. At precisely 8:04 p.m., headlights flashed through the window. Linda closed her laptop. "Showtime," she whispered. David stepped out of his car, his suit jacket missing his shirt, half untucked. He knocked once, then twice. I opened the door, keeping my tone neutral. "Did you come to sign or to argue?" His eyes were hollow. "I just need to understand how you could do this." "Easily," I said. "You made it easy." He tried to smile, but it faltered. "You don't want to destroy me, Rachel." "I don't," I said truthfully, "but I do want you accountable." I gestured toward the table where the legitimate divorce papers waited. He stared at them for a long time, then met my eyes. "If I sign, do you promise this doesn't go public? If you sign, I said you walk away with dignity. If you don't, you walk away with a criminal record." His jaw flexed the last remnants of pride fighting to survive. Finally, he reached for the pen. His hand trembled. "You always were smarter than I gave you credit for," he muttered. "No," I said. "You just stopped paying attention." The signature hit the paper with the soft finality of a closing door. Linda recorded the timestamp. David stood there a moment longer, staring at the ink as if it were blood. "You've won," he said bitterly. "No," I corrected. The truth did. He left without another word, his car engine fading into the distance. I turned to Linda. 23 hours, I said quietly. She smiled. He lasted longer than most. 2 days later, justice began to move on its own. The first call came from Thomas, his voice carrying a restrained satisfaction. "It's official," he said. "The board at his company has opened a full audit. They received an anonymous file this morning, copies of the documents and video evidence." I said nothing for a long moment, letting the words sink in. "Anonymous?" I asked finally. "Completely," he confirmed. "No trace back to you. They're already questioning his transactions with DM Holdings and the consulting fees paid to Allison Moore. He's been suspended pending investigation." For a moment, I almost pitied him. "Almost. That's fast," I murmured. "Not really," Thomas replied. "Corporate sharks move quicker when blood's in the water." When I hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the quiet house around me. The same kitchen that had once been his stage for humiliation was now the setting of his undoing. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its tiny camera lens long removed, but the memory of its purpose still strong. By afternoon, my inbox filled with forwarded articles from Linda. CFO David Mendez under internal investigation for financial misconduct. Alleged misuse of company funds and personal fraud. The headlines didn't make me smile, they made me breathe easier. This wasn't revenge anymore, it was balance. Linda called later that evening. "They're tearing through his accounts," she said, her tone a mix of awe and pride. "Apparently, Patrick's name came up in the audit too. He's facing charges for practicing law without a license. Guess karma decided to multitask." I leaned against the window, watching the sunset bleed across the Texas sky. "I didn't need to lift a finger," I said. "Everything just aligned." "That's what happens when you document the truth," Linda replied. "It starts defending itself." The next morning, David's number appeared on my screen again. I didn't answer. Then came a message, one line strangely calm. They fired me. Are you happy now? I read it twice, then deleted it. Happiness wasn't the right word. Peace was closer. Justice, maybe. Around noon, Thomas arrived at my doorstep with a slim folder in his hand. It's over, he said. He signed the settlement. All joint assets are now officially under your name. The divorce is finalized pending court confirmation next week. He placed the folder on the table, a quiet finality in his movement. You did everything right, Rachel. You didn't shout. You didn't retaliate. You just waited for the truth to speak. I poured him a glass of water the same way I had done for David months before and said he thought silence meant weakness. But silence was the trap. Thomas nodded, impressed. Most people fight to be heard. You fought to be proven. After he left, I sat alone at the table looking at the signed documents, his final signature sharp but uneven. Outside, a breeze rustled through the oak trees, carrying away the stale air that had lived in this house for too long. I realized something I hadn't expected. There was no joy in his downfall, only relief. He had gambled everything on arrogance, and arrogance had collected its debt. I took the papers, placed them in a folder labeled Final, and slid it into the drawer beside the camera card that had started it all. Then I whispered to the empty room, "It's done." It didn't take long for the collateral damage to surface. 2 weeks after David's suspension, Allison Moore's name began appearing in the same headlines that once carried his. The company's PR department released a statement about irregular financial partnerships and termination of an external consultant for ethics violations. Translation, she was out. I saw the article over my morning coffee, her photo beside his. Both of them caught mid-laughter at some corporate gala. The caption read like an obituary for ambition. Linda forwarded it to me with a single line, and the dominoes keep falling. The story detailed how Allison had received nearly $60,000 from David's discretionary fund under the guise of communications training. The auditors found the transfers, the falsified invoices, the shared password histories, everything. Within 48 hours, her consulting license was revoked. When the company confiscated David's phone, they discovered the message threads she thought were deleted, filled with plans about starting over and getting rid of loose ends. One of those loose ends had been me. Reading their words didn't hurt anymore. It clarified who they were. People who thought decency was optional and consequences were for others. That afternoon, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line, "I'm sorry, the body was short. You didn't deserve any of it. I never meant to hurt you. I hope one day you understand." It was signed Allison. For a moment, I just stared at it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing a single sentence. "I didn't destroy you, Allison. Your choices did." Then I hit send. I thought that would be the end of it, but karma rarely works on a schedule. 2 days later, Linda called, her voice low but gleeful. "You're not going to believe this. The board turned your evidence over to the state ethics committee. David's being formally charged with falsifying corporate filings." I sank into the couch, absorbing the words. He's actually being charged? Yes. And Patrick's under federal investigation for assisting. It's all unraveling, Rachel. Every lie, every shortcut. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, long and slow. "It's strange," I said softly. "When you imagine justice, you think it'll feel loud, explosive. But when it arrives, it's just quiet." Linda's tone softened. "That's because the noise was his, not yours." After the call, I opened the window again, letting the late summer air roll through. The scent of cut grass drifted inside, light and clean. I thought about how many nights I'd lost to his deceit, how many hours I'd spent doubting myself. Now the world had balanced itself without me lifting a hand. The truth had done all the work. I poured another cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where he once told me I'd get nothing. I smiled faintly at the irony. He had been right about one thing: I didn't get nothing. I got everything that mattered. 3 months later, the house no longer felt like a crime scene. The air smelled of lavender and lemon, not bourbon and tension. The heavy curtains David insisted on keeping drawn were gone, replaced by light linen that let the sun flood in every morning. I'd repainted the walls myself, one room at a time, stripping away the sterile gray he'd called modern and replacing it with soft cream and warm oak. Every stroke of the brush felt like erasing his fingerprints from my life. The divorce had become official 2 weeks earlier. Thomas sent the final decree by courier along with a note. "You've not only won your case, Rachel, you've rewritten it." I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk next to a letter from the school district offering me a promotion. I was now head of the history department, effective immediately. The irony didn't escape me. David used to sneer that I'd never rise above teaching kids about the past. Now the past had rewarded me for surviving it. On my first day in the new role, one of my students, an earnest 15-year-old named Claire, handed me a thank you card. "You always say details matter." I remembered because no one else ever told me that before. I read it 3 times before placing it beside Thomas's note. That night, Linda came over with a bottle of Cabernet and a wide grin. "You redecorated," she said, stepping inside and looking around. "It's beautiful. It actually looks like you live here now." "It finally feels like I do," I said, handing her a glass. She sank into the couch, glancing at the framed photo on the shelf, David leaning over the table during that fateful night mid-sentence captured by the camera that ended him. The timestamp glowed faintly in the corner. "You kept it?" she asked. I nodded. "Not out of spite. As a reminder. Of him. Of me," I said quietly. "Of the night I stopped letting someone else define my worth." We toasted the glasses, clinking softly. "To what?" she asked. "To silence," I said, "and to the power it hides." Later, after she left, I walked through the quiet house and paused at the table where everything had changed. The surface was spotless now, the clock on the wall reset with a new battery. For months, that table had been a battleground, but now it was just wood, ordinary, harmless mine. I placed a single photograph in the center, the still frame from the video printed and framed his signature frozen beneath the words that once sentenced me. It wasn't triumph I felt, it was closure. I realized then that revenge had never been the goal. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you stop fighting for love and start fighting for truth. The sound of crickets filled the night outside. I opened the back door and stepped into the yard, the grass cool under my feet. The sky stretched wide and endless, the stars clean and sharp. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. No call, no apology, no validation. My life no longer revolved around what he'd taken. It revolved around what I'd reclaimed. I whispered to the dark half-prayer, half-declaration. He said I'd get nothing, but he was wrong. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning, months after the final paperwork had been filed, and his name had stopped echoing in my inbox. I was standing in the produce aisle of a small grocery store on the outskirts of Dallas, comparing the prices of apples, when I heard a voice behind me, hesitant, trembling, just slightly. "Rachel!" I turned. Margaret Mendez stood there, her shopping cart half full, her face pale but composed. David's mother. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The last time I'd seen her was at our 10th anniversary party when she'd pulled me aside and said, "My son deserves a wife who can keep up." I remembered smiling politely back then, hiding the sting. Now the words belonged to another lifetime. "Mrs. Mendez." I said finally, my tone warm but careful. "It's been a while." She nodded slowly. "It has." Her hands tightened around the handle of the cart. "I heard about the investigation. And the company." I said nothing. She swallowed, looking down. "He's not doing well," she said quietly. "He's lost his position in the house. He moved into a small apartment downtown. And Allison she left months ago. She took what little he had left." There was no triumph in hearing it, only inevitability. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Margaret nodded again, her eyes glistening. "I misjudged you," she whispered. "All of us did. I thought you were ordinary, the quiet kind who fades when life gets loud." I smiled faintly. "Quiet doesn't mean weak." "No," she agreed, a sad smile touching her lips. "It doesn't. We all underestimated you." For a moment there was genuine warmth between us two women who had loved the same flawed man in different ways and both paid for it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. "He asked me to give you this if I ever saw you." I hesitated, then took it. "Thank you." "He wanted to say he's sorry," she said softly, "and that you were right about everything." I nodded, sliding the envelope into my bag without opening it. "I hope he finds peace," I said. Margaret looked at me for a long moment, then smiled a tired, wistful expression. "You already have," she said, and pushed her cart down the aisle, disappearing among the shelves of fruit and cereal boxes. I stood there for a while, staring at the red apples under the bright fluorescent lights. The past didn't feel heavy anymore. It just felt distant. When I got home, I placed the unopened envelope on the counter beside the framed photo from that night. Then I poured myself a glass of water and whispered into the quiet house, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's just finally being free." That night, after the grocery store encounter, I sat out on the back porch with a glass of wine and the Texas sky unfolding above me. The air was warm, alive with the hum of cicadas, the stars scattered across the horizon like tiny verdicts of light. The house behind me glowed softly through the windows, clean, calm, utterly mine. On the small table beside me sat the envelope Margaret had given me. I turned it over in my hands for a long time before finally opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His handwriting was shaky, uneven. "Rachel, I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I lost everything and maybe I deserved to. I should have seen how much you carried for us. I should have seen how strong you were. You didn't just win, you showed me what strength looks like." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and set it aside. The apology didn't move me. It didn't anger me either. It simply felt irrelevant. Closure doesn't come from someone's regret. It comes from your own peace. I reached for my phone and typed one message. "Thank you for the apology, but you were wrong. I didn't end up with nothing." I hesitated, then added, "I got myself back." I hit send, then blocked the number for the last time. The phone felt lighter in my hand. A few minutes later, I turned my attention to the horizon. The sun had long since vanished, but the faint orange line it left behind glowed like a promise of better mornings. For the first time, I realized I didn't think about him every day anymore. My life no longer existed in the shadow of his decisions. It was built on my own. I thought of my students of Claire's note pinned above my desk of Linda's laughter, echoing in this same kitchen of the smell of coffee and sunlight in a house that once reeked of tension. All those small, ordinary details he used to dismiss as meaningless, they were the things that had rebuilt me. I stood stepping back inside. The framed photo on the office wall caught my eye again, David leaning over the table, confident blind to the truth, inches away. I'd positioned it beside my teaching certificate and a small handwritten note that said, "Details matter." Every day it reminded me who I was before, during, and after him. I ran my finger lightly over the glass and whispered, "Thank you for underestimating me." Justice hadn't needed a courtroom. It had unfolded here in late night's quiet choices and unwavering patience. Every page I'd signed that night was more than a legal move. It was an act of self-respect disguised as surrender. He had called me weak for teaching, small for being content, unambitious for staying. But teaching had made me precise. It had made me patient. It had made me dangerous in the most civilized way possible. As the clock struck midnight, I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known existed. Not victory, just completion. The war was over, the silence finally earned. I poured the last of the wine into my glass and stepped back onto the porch. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere far away. "You said I'd get nothing," I murmured to the night. "But you were wrong." The stars flickered brighter as if in agreement, and I sat there until the sky turned the soft gray of morning, certain of one simple truth, that sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply living well quietly and on your own terms.